Welcome to Lexington Public Library's Tales from the Kentucky Room podcast, where we explore Lexington's history and people. I'm your host, David Bryant, and in each episode, we will feature a guest who will share a piece of local history. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the Tales from the Kentucky Room podcast. I'm your host, David Bryant, and today I'm really excited to be talking to Josh Porter. Josh is the Assistant Executive Director of the Faulkner Morgan Archive. Faulkner Morgan is a Kentucky-based institution with a focus on recording and sharing Kentucky's LGBTQ history. Welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Faulkner Morgan just opened a really cool exhibit at Lexington Public Library. It's called Queer Here and Everywhere, The Roots of Kentucky's LGBTQ History. It's on display at the Central Library through June 26th, correct?
Yep.
And then after that...
Yes, and then, so this will be a big traveling exhibit. So right now we have two venues already scheduled. So it will be at the Lexington Pride Festival outside Oliver Lewis Way on June 28th. And then later this fall, in August, September, it will be at the Lexington History Museum. So we're very excited about that.
Okay, great. So lots of opportunities to check it out. So Josh, to get started, could you provide an overview of what's covered in the exhibit and what was the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, so the exhibit truly covers over 200 years of queer history. So it was funded by 250 Lex, a grant from them. And so thinking about, the past 250 years, we really wanted to showcase that breadth. We have representation of Revolutionary War veterans all the way up to today and Pride festivals that are happening last year.
Oh, great. So who are some of the more well-known people from people who know Lexington history that they may expect to see?
Yeah, of the panels that we have right now, I'd say the ones that people immediately will recognize: Henry Faulkner, Sweet Evening Breeze, the Fairness Campaign, the Bar Complex. Those are probably the four most well-known of all the panels and of the topics, but I do think a lot of this exhibit does showcase some maybe undertold stories that people don't know, and so I think there's a lot of new information that people will get from this exhibit.
And is that how it's organized? Is it in different panels? And
yeah, okay. Yeah, so this exhibit consists of 8 double-sided panels. I think they're like 9 feet tall, 3 feet wide. So there's really 16 kind of faces that sort of tell this story. And so each one's thematic. So some of them, like Henry Faulkner and Sweet Evening Breeze, both have a full panel to themselves, or like a full side of a panel. But then some sort of mention multiple people in multiple histories. Like we have one about early history that mentions, the 2 Revolutionary War soldiers, Robert Craddock and Peter Tardiveau, and also Belle Breezing, and really looking at some of that early 20th century and even pre-20th century history.
How did you discover Revolutionary era?
So I am lucky that when I joined the archive, about a year and a half ago, they have been working 9 years already on this history and on this research. And so, obviously founders Bob Morgan and John Coleman put a lot of effort in. I think that history, there's a lot I know that J.P. Johnson has contributed to the archive, doing a lot of research in newspaper clippings. There's one representation on Aaron Bark, a trans man in 1900s, 1910s, like very early history. So it's really a group effort. I keep talking about this exhibit as, we got the 250 Lex grant a year ago. So it's, been a year in the making, but in reality, it's been 10 years in the making with the archive being around since 2014. And even that is really based on the generations of queer people who've been documenting themselves and keeping track of their own history throughout that time. So really, all of that is indebted to every single person that's done all this research. And so we kind of see ourselves as one method of combining this information into one central place that people can find it easily.
And one of the things that I think is interesting, so it covers the expected urban locations like Lexington and Louisville, where it's easier to find this information, but it also includes smaller counties and rural areas. Could you talk a little bit about that and what kind of sources are used to make those discoveries?
Yeah, so we are very adamant that we don't want to fall into the trap of looking into just urban spaces, because, that's sort of why we exist in the first place, is to show that queer history isn't just New York and San Francisco, but it's in Kentucky. But even looking in Kentucky, we can fall into the trap of only looking at major metropolitan areas like Lexington and Louisville. But one of the best ways we've found to actually find more rural history is actually to look at the background of people that were in Lexington. So a lot of queer people were not born in Lexington, but travel here and come here for community. So if you kind of take a step back and you say, oh, well, actually, they were in Grant County for the first 20 years of their life until they moved to Lexington. What is that story? What happened while they were there? And so most of these are all personal stories, either people who have passed and people share their story with us, or people share their own story. It's very interesting to see how much there's a lot of oral history, and we know there's a lot that we have no idea about yet. So that's sort of something we're very excited to continue to grow, because we have aspirations to be an archive of all of queer Kentucky, which is very aspirational, I think. So, but I think working towards that has been really fruitful.
Yeah. And so a lot of people who listen to this podcast are people who are doing like family history research, genealogy. And so you mentioned, and this is so common with Kentucky history, people would move through the area, going other places and stuff. What kind of sources? I think you mentioned newspaper articles, but what are some of the, like if you had a relative that lived in Grant County and then moved to Louisville, like what kind of sources would a person look to maybe make some of these discoveries?
So, I mean, newspaper is a big one, but really it's truly storytelling of people sharing, their own history and the history of people that they knew or know still. It really is, because a lot of that isn't documented. We don't know who was queer, who was gay, who was lesbian, who's trans, unless someone says so, really, a lot of times, whether that's in writing, whether that's verbally. And so really at the core of our archive is we're very non-traditional in the sense that we do not focus too much on sort of traditional methods of research of articles and newspapers and documents. And instead, we really have a strong focus in just the sort of everyday personal lives of queer Kentuckians. So we have collections from people that are their family photos, their personal photos, just their letters, buttons they had, T-shirts they had. Like it's really trying to tell the whole story of a person that they have the agency to tell themselves rather than just finding that information. So most everything that we've been finding, typically, there is obviously some research we do in newspapers and stuff like that, but a lot of what we have is truly just people sharing stories. And so stories are always at the center of all of what we do.
Yeah, that's great. So what are some surprising things you think people may learn from the exhibit?
I mean, I do think the Revolutionary War one will always be
definitely
a fun story to tell, thinking about Robert Craddock and Peter Tardiveau. I actually went to go see their graves the other week, just by happenstance. I was in Bowling Green. But yeah, they're buried. There's a long story there, but in the end, they were buried side by side. Neither of them were married. And on Peter's tombstone, it says, "Comrade in arms and friend of Robert Craddock," just engraved on the tombstone because Robert wanted that and Peter wanted that. And so, like, seeing that legacy of, queer people were in Kentucky before the U.S. existed. Like, this legacy is very long and not new.
Yeah. And so I assume they're covered in the exhibit.
Yes, they're on one of the early panels is those two, for sure.
Yeah. Very cool. So more generally, can you've touched on this a little bit, but what is kind of the goal of the Faulkner Morgan Archive? How would it get started? What are some of the goals, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the archive started in 2014, kind of by an accident. So our founders, John Coleman and Bob Morgan, met by happenstance at some event and got to talking because John's a historian and Bob's an artist and also a hoarder. Love him. He keeps everything. And so Bob was really looking for a place to put his archive and his materials, especially the stuff from Henry Faulkner that he received after Henry's death. So he really wanted to carry on that legacy and those materials. And different organizations and institutions were reaching out to him to get his collection, but he was kind of hesitant about putting this material in state-funded institutions. If policies change, if culture changes, what happens? So this was back in 2014. And so after meeting John and talking with him, they decided to start processing and collecting and archiving Bob's collection. So the two of them met every single Sunday, I think for like 1 or 2 years, just going through and creating the archive. And so originally it was just Bob's stuff. But then as they were going through this, they were finding so many stories of other people and really starting to see a more well-rounded Kentucky queer history that isn't just about Bob and Henry. And so since then, more and more people have donated to the archive, more research has happened. John and Bob especially have been very good about uncovering things that, have been hidden for a really long time. So yeah, it started by an accident of just Bob's stuff and has now grown. And our mission in the beginning was to preserve this history as well, which we do, but our mission has shifted in the past few years to sharing this history and really putting the focus on this history needs to be known, it needs to be shared, it needs to be visible in whatever way we can do that. And so sharing this history is really at the center of what we do.
Okay. Yeah, that's really great. So you mentioned it will be on display at the Central Library in Lexington till, I think, June 26th.
Yep.
And then after that, it's going to...
It'll be at the Lexington Pride Festival on June 28th, and then a little bit of a break before it goes to the Lexington History Museum in August.
Okay, so there's lots of opportunities to see it. Are there any future projects that you have in the works?
Yeah, so this exhibit we built in a way that it can sort of grow and live on for a very long time. So firstly, it is a traveling exhibit that we want it to travel for years and years. So we want venues to reach out to us. We want this to be, outside of Lexington, in Eastern Kentucky, Western Kentucky, Northern Kentucky, really having this exhibit travel around. And another part of that is this exhibit is very easy to grow. So they're just sort of 8 independent panels that, go as a group, but we can add any panels at any time, really. We just have to get the money and do it. So I'm actually working on a grant right now to do an additional 4 panels. And if we get that, hopefully next year the exhibit will already have grown to 12 panels. Because obviously when you have 8 double-sided panels, there's a lot that you can't fit in. And so that we look forward to growing this as a way of highlighting some of the gaps that may have occurred and that we know exist in this history and in the telling of this history especially.
Okay, well, Josh Porter, this is really exciting. It's been so fun to talk to you and hearing about the exhibit. I encourage everyone to check it out if you get the chance, and look forward to hearing more from you soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Tales from the Kentucky Room, a podcast brought to you by the Central Library's Kentucky Room staff at the Lexington Public Library. If you enjoyed listening, please take a minute to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast. And please remember to recommend the podcast to friends. If you have any questions about local history or genealogy research, you can visit us in the Kentucky Room to use our collection and newspaper microfilm. Or you can email us at elibrarian@lexpublib.org. That's elibrarian@lexpublib.org. I'm David Bryant, and we'll be back with another episode next month.